Live Long, Die Laughing, chapters 6 and 7. God says no, too. One of the funniest stories I've ever heard involves the Goodmans at an all-day singing in the Amish country. Kevin Spencer promotes the outdoor event each year. On the day of the concert, Kevin thought the weather looked bad, so he wanted to hurry up and get the Goodmans on stage. Well, during their performance, it started sprinkling, so Vestal asked the audience to pray with her. She raised her face toward heaven, lifted her voice in prayer, and asked God to stop the rain. I don't know if you've ever heard Vestal pray, but she walks directly into the throne room, announces her daughtership, reminds God of all those scriptures he wrote, and stands firmly on every promise. I've never heard anyone pray like Vestal, and God usually tells Vestal yes. But suddenly, there came a gully washing toad strangler. The heavens opened and the rain came pouring down. The concert location was in a hilly part of the country. On a steep grade uphill behind the stage to the left sat a large pond, a pond that had never overflowed. It was connected to a dam that had never broken. At that moment, both did. A 6-foot tidal wave came crashing toward the stage. It hit the sound system, knocking over the loudspeakers. Above the confusion with people scrambling and chairs flying, Vestal looked at the audience and said, "Good God, he said no! Run for your lives!" Isn't that something? Our good God said no. Everyone knows a good father sometimes has to say no. And evidently, sometimes he shouts it. Chapter 7, My Visit with Greatness. I was in Asheville, North Carolina for a concert on April Fool's Day. While walking back to my hotel after lunch, the concert promoter passed me in his car. He slammed on the brakes and whipped his vehicle out of the traffic and over to the curb. "Mark," he called, "hurry, Miss Graham wants to see you." "Mrs. who?" "Mrs. Graham. You know Ruth Graham, as in Mrs. Billy Graham. She wants you to come up to her house in Montreat." "You've got to be kidding. April Fool's, right?" "No, really, I'm serious. Mrs. Graham would like for you to come visit her. Maury Scobie from the Graham organization has driven down to pick you up." I didn't know that Ruth Graham was aware that I was even on the planet. I had met Billy Graham when the Gaither Vocal Band had sung for the Billy Graham Crusade. I determined that I wanted to shake his hand. After all, to me, Billy Graham was the Baptist Pope. I didn't know if I'd ever get a chance to be in his presence again on this earth, so when he walked onto the Crusade platform, surrounded by Crusade officials and his assistants, I lunged toward Dr. Graham as if I were Lee Harvey Oswald. For a moment, the men around Dr. Graham froze in stark terror, but Billy Graham didn't even flinch. He just extended his hand to shake mine and smiled politely. His horrified assistants relaxed when they realized, oh, it's just that lunatic Lowry. That was my fleeting brush with greatness. So imagine my surprise to discover that Mrs. Graham even knew my name, let alone wanted to see me. I told the concert promoter to give me 30 minutes, and I raced up to my hotel room to shower and change clothes. You can't enter the presence of greatness wearing casual, rumpled clothes. 30 minutes later, Maury Scobie was sitting in a large sport utility vehicle outside my hotel, waiting to whisk me to Montreat. On the way, Maury told me the story of how the Grahams had purchased the Montreat property years ago. Mrs. Graham had scoured the area, searching for just the right pieces of old logs and lumber to be used in their home. They have lived in that same log home throughout their ministry, raising their children there, and maintaining a low-key profile in the area. How would you feel if Billy and Ruth Graham were your neighbors? I bet you'd pay them back for all those cups of sugar you borrowed. Some of the Grahams' closest neighbors are George Beverly Shea and his wife Carlene. Maury and I stopped at the Shea's home first. I thought he might want to give me some singing tips. At the time of my visit, George Beverly Shea was 91 years of age, and he was still singing at the Billy Graham Crusades. His deep baritone voice is known by millions of people around the world, as he has sung some of the greatest gospel songs ever written. He is probably the best-known gospel singer in the history of the world. More than that, however, he is one of the sweetest, humblest, kindest, and most gracious human beings I've ever met. I had a marvelous time visiting with the Sheas. We had coffee and played some old songs on the stereo. They told me stories and we sang together around the piano. I thought, Mama ain't gonna believe that I'm here singing with the legendary George Beverly Shea. I called her on the telephone so George could speak with her. Mama wasn't home, so Mr. Shea left her a voicemail message so she would be able to save it. I said my goodbyes to George and Carlene, and then it was time to move up the mountain to visit Mrs. Graham. Dr. Graham was in Los Angeles, receiving an award for the Ronald Reagan Library. I think they're still typing mine up. Maury and I were ushered into the Graham's large log cabin, where we were greeted by Mrs. Graham's nurse. Mrs. Graham had recently undergone hip surgery and was still recovering in a cast, resting on a couch. But that did not diminish her radiant charm. She greeted me warmly when I was introduced to her. Lying on the couch, she had been looking out a large plate glass window through which she could see the breathtaking view of the mountains surrounding their home. God was showing off when he made this place, I said, nodding toward the panoramic view outside Mrs. Graham's window. She laughed. He sure was, she said. And the scenic view changes every day. Mrs. Graham was sipping a Coke float, and she kindly offered me one too. How could I refuse an offer like that? I said, sure, I'd love to have a Coke float with you. The nurse quickly made a float for me, and Mrs. Graham and I sat there sipping and talking. Mrs. Graham told me about their house, and especially the centerpiece of the home, the large fireplace in the living room. You've probably seen pictures of Dr. Graham sitting in front of the fireplace in a rocking chair. Well, that's the one. It has a beautiful mantle engraved in German with the words, quote, "A mighty fortress is our God," close quote. Mrs. Graham loves fireplaces. The more the merrier. So there are 5 fireplaces in their home. Dr. Graham only wanted 2, but while he was preaching in Europe, Mrs. Graham told the workers to build 5 fireplaces as quickly as they could. Mrs. Graham expressed how much she enjoyed the Gaither homecoming videos, especially the funny parts. That made me feel good. She said that she rewinds the tapes and plays them over and over. I didn't know how much time I'd have to visit with Mrs. Graham, so early in our conversation, I asked her one of my favorite questions. Do you think Jesus knew who he was when he was a baby? Well, I never really thought about that, I guess, Mrs. Graham said softly, as though she were pondering the ramifications of her answer. My dad believes that Jesus knew who he was the second he was conceived, I told her. But I told Dad, well, then Jesus must have been faking all those diaper changes. Mrs. Graham laughed and said she'd never thought about that. We talked a lot about God and various theological questions, and Mrs. Graham didn't seem to be in any hurry to end our conversation. I've always tried to be sensitive to someone's time, especially some of the well-known people I've been privileged to meet. They are all so busy, and I appreciate their allowing me to have any time with them at all. Besides, I know that I'm a lot like the old hair care product, Brill Cream. A little dabble, do ya? I didn't want to overstay my welcome. When I met Bob Hope, he was 92 years old. My friend Martha Bolton had arranged for me to visit with him at his home in California. Bob Hope didn't know me from Adam, but he was so kind and engaging. It was great fun simply to be in his presence. He hummed constantly as he showed me all around his home, which was decked out with pictures of him and Lucille Ball and a bunch of other famous comedians and movie stars. At one point during my visit, Bob Hope led me into a large walk-in vault filled with nothing but file cabinets. "What's in all the file cabinets?" I asked. "Jokes, man," Bob answered. "There's money in those cabinets." After about 20 minutes, I sang, "Thanks for the memories," for Bob and Martha, took my picture with him, and then I left. Bob didn't seem ready for me to go, but like I said, I've learned not to stay too long in the presence of greatness. When I was visiting with Mrs. Graham, I tried to do the same thing. Just keep the visit short and sweet and don't impose too much or take up too much of her time. After about 30 minutes or so, I said, "Well, Mrs. Graham, I really need to get back. I really don't want to keep you," trying to excuse myself tactfully. "Oh, I wish you could stay a little longer," Ruth Graham said. "Well, I can't stay as long as you want," I admitted. "But which bedroom would be mine?" She laughed, not realizing I was serious. And we continued to talk about serious subjects and silly ones, and we laughed together. It was a wonderful afternoon, and I will never forget my wise, gracious hostess. I was truly in the presence of greatness.